Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus. Each Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes, or head over to amyrowlandson.com and sign up right now. Today, on the Focus on Why podcast, I am joined by Dr. Lizzy Bernthal. Lizzy, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Well, I had a little chuckle just before you came into the Zoom call because I had a doctor waiting in my waiting room, which I thought was a little bit funny, a little bit ironic there. So I'm not a doctor myself. So I just thought, oh, yeah, that's nice to see the tables have turned for once.
Yeah, exactly. Exciting.
So what is it that you're doing at the moment, Lizzy?
Well, I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission because I am passionate that we don't have toxic leadership in business anymore because it can be really miserable. So I help authentic leaders stand tall, own who they are. And when they stand tall, then they support their teams to stand tall. And then there's no place for toxic leadership.
And what is it that it shows up as toxic leadership? How would you know that you've got a toxic leader?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is, I've experienced, I think we've all experienced in our lives, those bosses that are actually, we don't realize at the time, but they're quite toxic, but we think it's all about us. We think it's because we're not good enough. And so certainly it shows up when leaders come to see me, is that often they lack confidence. They find they're too scared to speak up at meetings sometimes. They just don't go for the promotion that they wanted or they feel that they should be doing. And they just feel they're just not showing up as they know they could. They're capable of doing so. And then when we unpick all that, it's because somebody has just been knocking them down. So what happens is that knocks their confidence. And so they start sort of almost like feeling small. But when we unpick all that, we acknowledge, I help them acknowledge it's nothing to do with them. But they're not always aware that their leader, their boss, whoever is in their life is doing that to them, that it's nothing to do with them. So once they acknowledge that it's nothing to do with them, they find the confidence is already within them because we're all born with confidence. Then they just suddenly wake up and everything starts changing. And it's just magical to witness.
So it's interesting because who would book you knowing that they might be a toxic leader?
Well, it's not the toxic leader who would ever book me because they don't see themselves as toxic leaders. That's the interesting thing. I think toxic leadership is we hear a lot about toxic leadership. Nobody who is behaving in a toxic way ever sees themselves as toxic. That's just how they are. And it's those around them that have the impact. So it's those around them they're the people I'm passionate, the leaders I'm passionate to support, to help them acknowledge they have it all. And then it is incredible how they show up powerfully. And when they show up powerfully, the leader that's toxic, just their behavior changes because there's no victim bully. If the bully is not having any impact on the victim, there's no point. So it changes. So it's almost they become the ripple in the pond by removing some of the toxicity in the culture of the organization. And as a result, it just becomes a happier place for everyone to work.
And is this an environment that you've always worked in, or were you doing something different before?
Yeah, no, I think the reason I'm so passionate about this, I spent 25 years in the army as a nurse and a midwife, and then latterly in research. And I did lots of research with organisations looking at why women were not in senior rolling positions. But also as part of that, I had a toxic boss and I didn't realise it at the time. And then one day, he undermined me one more time and just something snapped in me. And I just stood up that day in a meeting and absolutely let rip in an empowered, controlled way, not like a child throwing their tantrum, but in an empowered, controlled way. And suddenly everything changed from that moment. And I then saw that it was toxic leadership, not that it wasn't all me and there was something wrong with me. And I vowed at that moment that I would help leaders never have to experience the same as I'd experienced. So I think most of us that do hopefully great stuff, it's because we've had an experience and we never want others to go through that experience ourselves. So that's certainly my driver.
And you said right at the beginning that you are on a mission to help the authentic people become leaders. Now, having 25 years in the army, your version of a mission is probably slightly different to other people's.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I have deployed to Afghanistan all around the world, and seen some very extraordinary places and challenging environments. So I think, we're all authentic if we choose to be authentic. So when I say make leaders, they are already the leader already. That's the whole point. But sometimes there's conversations that go off in our heads that can stop them realizing how awesome they really are. And once we unpick a bit of that, then they start owning who they are and they move into the real person within them that is that authentic, powerful, enlightened leader.
And you said that something went off inside you, which you then made a vow to yourself that you were going to focus on this. And this podcast is talk about focus on why. And it seems to be that both angles are really covered here, that you've got the focus and you've got the why. Share with me and the audience what the focus is and how you stay on focus.
Yeah, I think we all need a purpose in life, and actually I deliver workshops to help businesses and leaders identify their purpose. Once we have a purpose, everything changes in our life, because we're on such a, and I say the word mission, but we are on such a mission to make a difference. We haven't got time to be lying in bed and being miserable. Oh, it's Monday morning, I hate my work. When you have something bigger than yourself, then we have a duty to do it and get on with it, and we have no time to waste. So it creates that urgency and that momentum to just do it, and that's when everything changes.
And with the purpose piece, and you said you work with companies and help them to deliver their purpose as well. The individual purpose and the business purpose, how aligned do you believe they need to be?
Essential. And I think this is when I help businesses and individuals identify their values. And it's values that really mean something to them. We've all been to organisations when they've got a placard on the wall that says our mission is this and our values are this. Always innovation, integrity, authenticity. Those are the values they always generally put up. But what does it mean? What does integrity really mean? Are you living in integrity? What does innovation mean? And you cannot have innovation without courage, because courage, innovation by definition is a risk. And in order to take a risk, that takes courage. So it's unpicking what are the true values of the individuals. And when you find the true values of the individuals and the culture that the organisation wants to develop, it's making sure that it matches and engaging everyone in that organisation with the values so they really own them and they're living them. And to my mind, a leader is a leader when no one's watching. And that's the difference. When it becomes part of who you are, it's not a question of living your values, because it's so embedded within you that you just do it naturally.
And your role in the army, you said you spent 25 years there, a nurse, a midwife, and then latter parts in research. How much of the culture has sort of become who you are from the army's perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I left as a lieutenant colonel, and so I had a team to manage, a team to support. I was in a fairly senior position, and I was always passionate about supporting my team. And looking back on it, I often took, if you want to use a medical term, the bullets for my team. If we had what you could describe as a tricky boss, but actually there's no one that's tricky. It's how they make us feel that's tricky, not the person themselves. That I would always be standing up for my team and almost like I'll take the flak. I learned a huge amount about leadership when I was in the army. I think leadership of ourselves, because we can only lead ourselves before we can lead our teams. And, certainly being in very adverse situations, you learn so much about yourself and what your strengths are, what, maybe you could do differently. And it's all about feedback. Every minute of every day is feedback. And there's no such thing as failure. Failure is just purely feedback. And so, yes, I learned a huge amount. There was some, obviously, the culture of the military is like give of your best and do it no matter what, and no such thing as failure, and and sacrifice to a certain extent. Sacrifice to the extent that you're prepared to give your life if it's required. Now, and I think what's been so interesting over the last 18 months is how all those qualities that are embedded within a military culture have come to the fore with all of us. All of us have suddenly found ourselves in a war zone, for want of a better word, with COVID, and bringing up all sorts of thoughts and feelings that maybe they weren't used, most people are not used to, and a common enemy that we're all fighting against, we don't know where it is. And so it's been a really interesting experience over the last 18 months with those same emotions that so many are going through they're not used to, where you have that complete roller coaster of 1 minute, wow, it's great, we're working at home and can do the washing in the middle of the day and all that sort of practical stuff, to the sudden, like, wow, what's all this about? And now as we emerge from it, it's like, whoa, it is like a deployment. I've been on the hamster wheel, coping, homeschooling, all the stuff we've had to deal with. Now we're sort of like going back out there again, but oh my goodness, that's a bit scary. It's just like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. So it's been really interesting from my perspective, seeing it from a military angle as a bit of a deployment for everyone.
Yeah, it's a really interesting perspective that you share there. And something that I've noticed, a lot of people who come out of the army, they have that sort of loss of purpose, a loss of individual or self or collective nature. And again, it's probably what people have been feeling also, is that they were all in it together in COVID. And then now it's like, okay, you're back to fending for yourself again.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think there's a whole level of discussion about, belonging versus fitting in. And what I find really fascinating about belonging and fitting in, we all want to belong because it's a tribal thing. Millions of years ago, if you didn't belong to the tribe, you'd starve because no one fed you with a lion. So we all need that really strong sense of belonging. But actually, the irony of it all is fitting in is the complete opposite of belonging, because we can only belong to ourselves. So if we try and fit in, we're not being true to ourselves, because we're like that chameleon that fits into whatever that round hole in the square peg. And what's interesting about COVID is that we've had that common this is a vast generalization, which through research you should never do, but we've had this sort of common enemy that we're all fighting against. And now, as we start going back to whatever life happens from the next few months on, we haven't got that same sense of cohesion that we maybe had, way back in March last year, when suddenly we were all at home, all homeschooling, all doing this thing. And now there's levels of, the whole hybrid of going back to work into the physical environment. Some are staying working at home, some are going back, some organizations are saying everybody's got to be in, some organizations say we're not ready yet. So there's this whole kind of mishmash, which can be confusing without really knowing navigating those emotions and acknowledging that they're emotions, and that's okay too.
And did you ever find, Lizzy, when you were in the army, that you had almost a conflict because you're all about saving life, but then you also had the knowledge that you're about sacrificing your own life if required?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Now, interestingly, my two uncles were killed because I'm eighth generation of army. So I had been brought up with that feeling of sacrifice, and it's our duty, and duty's been a massive strong driver for me. And that there are, sometimes people find it quite confusing. How can you be a nurse and a midwife to make people better, but you're in a fighting organization? But it's literally there. My role was always to save lives as much as I possibly could, and so do my bit to save irrelevant of background conflict. When I was working in Afghanistan, we had to manage it very carefully, because potentially you could have somebody in the Taliban who's been injured next to a soldier who's trying to blow him up. So we navigating all that sort of culture was really interesting and challenging. But yeah, I think it was, even then, even though I didn't understand what purpose was really when I was serving, it's still something bigger than ourselves, still there to make a difference, still there with a strong driver to make the world a better place. And by going into humanitarian and a humanitarian conflict, doing whatever we can do, each as an individual, but as a collective, to make the world a better place.
And with that, you mentioned duty and duty being a strong driver for you. And you talked about values. What are your core values, Lizzy?
Being authentic, integrity, and innovation. Just as I said earlier on. But really, to me, integrity is 100% a way of being. Down to the practical of, like, people pleaser just goes, because if you're a people pleaser, and I used to be a people pleaser, you know, acknowledging that that's not integrity, because you're saying yes, for example, because you want to please the other person. But that's not being honest with yourself. So integrity is how you live your life every minute of every day. Even saying, at home, oh, I'm going to empty the dishwasher, but actually, no, I'm not going to empty the dishwasher. I'll wait till my husband empties the dishwasher. Even to that practical level, that is what living is, a life of integrity. And fulfilling your promises and doing what you say. And then everything changes, because you feel that sense of peace and within you.
And you mentioned innovation, but you also mentioned innovation in connection with courage. Now, it
Yeah.
takes great courage. I would imagine, I don't know, but to serve for your country, it must take courage.
Well, I never saw it that, actually. It's interesting. I was always in awe of the courage of some, other soldiers who literally went. For example, when I was in Afghanistan, I was in the headquarters for the whole of Afghanistan. So I was there to ensure safety and effectiveness of clinical effectiveness for all the 6,000 troops there. I wasn't literally going out on patrol every single day when the chance of 1 in 6 of that your colleagues are not going to come back. To me, that is courage. But I think courage is a really interesting one, because courage is not something that you can create. Courage is an act. So you can feel the fear, the classic feel the fear and do it anyway. So the courage is the behavior as the result of not letting the fear stop you taking the action. So I don't believe you can be courageous, and so much is a perception by other people. Yeah, some people see that I was brave, I went to Afghanistan. I don't see that. That was me doing my duty. What I see is the soldiers that went out on patrol every day. They were truly courageous. But if you speak to any of the soldiers that did that, they just did what they did. So I think it's a really interesting phenomena. But I think, innovation, as I say, anything that has a risk, you need some level of overcoming fear. And then if you describe courage as overcoming fear, yes, that's where the courage comes in with innovation, because it's always a risk that it doesn't work and you're putting yourself above the parapet. And often you can create innovation without realizing you're creating innovation. I think I just talk about my own experiences, that I always have been one that just pushes doors open. And if there's a chink, just push it. Or if there's not a chink, make sure you find one. And it was interesting because no one in the army had ever done a PhD as a nurse before. And I thought that was wrong, because doctors did them. And so I put up a case that we should do it. And by the way, if you're going to do it, can I be the first one? And then when I left, nurses were being funded annually. So I never when I had my final dinner, somebody came up, one of my junior soldiers who I'd actually not seen for 10 years, came up to me and said, "Do you realize the legacy you've created?" And I said, "No, it's just what I did." And so I think innovation doesn't have to be, "Oh, now we're going to innovate." It's just having the courage to do what you think's right, despite what people might think, and just think differently, and just think, let's just give it a go, let's experiment. So innovation is really a big experiment of not just doing it the way we've always done it.
And it's really interesting because you said you were 8th generation of army and you were just brought up, and it kind of almost, as you said, your duty to do that. Did you feel you had a choice still?
Yeah, my parents never put any pressure on me. And in fact, I was really old. I was 31 when I joined the army, which actually is pretty old. Normally, most people join when they're 18 or, after graduating. So I lived a life abroad. I traveled around the world working as a midwife in various countries in the Far East and the Middle East. And then I just decided that, I wanted to give it a go. So yes, no pressure from my parents, but of course, they were delighted. But yeah, no pressure from my parents at all.
And I love that you've created this legacy, Lizzy. It sort of gave me a prickle. I felt that sort of tear in my eye well up when someone says that, when you almost normalize what you've done and you don't realize quite how pioneering or how innovative it has been until somebody then sort of reflects it back at you.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought that's just what I did. And it was, I think, what was so humbling about that, because I didn't want to go to the dinner because I didn't want to be the centre of attention. And then everybody said, "Oh, you've got to go. You've been in the army for 25 years, you've got to go." And, it was wonderful speeches and all that sort of stuff. But it was incredible that somebody who I'd not seen for 10 years had made a big effort to come, because wanted to be there to see me on my way, and came up to me. And what was the other thing about that, which is, again, you never know the impact you have on others. At the same dinner, there was an award for the best officer, and the guy that won it, I had encouraged to go for a commission 10 years before, and I'd been sort of mentoring him, and then because of postings and so forth, we'd sort of lost touch. And then, again, it was wonderful. Out of all the people that could have been there, it was him that I'd been really mentoring, to say, look, you've got a career ahead. You've got a wonderful career. Just own who you are, and then things will happen. And it was wonderful to see that he had owned who he was, and as a result was being rewarded for it. So, yeah.
So in that same breath, you didn't want to be the centre of attention and own who you are.
Yeah, exactly. Which is not good, is it? It's not very authentic. Yeah, but I'm very aware of that now. I'm very aware that, when I help leaders stand tall, I got to be taller than anyone, because how can I be authentic? You say, yes, you can do it, but no, I'm not prepared to do it. So that's all part of leadership, you've got to lead by example, whether it's uncomfortable, whether it's scary, you have to fly your plane and fly out the plane. If you're ever going to ask anybody to do the same thing, even a minuscule of what you've got to do, you've got to be the one that shows what's possible.
And I'm loving all these metaphors that you're using. Obviously, they're going to filter into your language, taking the bullets for the team and flying out your plane. They've got to be there, right? They've got to be all these army metaphors. But the language that you use, Lizzy, and the way that you are articulating what you're advocating and what your experiences have led you to believe. What is it about the adversity that you've experienced that has influenced all of the way you are now?
Yeah, because I think my mindset is things happen to us. They happen for us, not to us. So all the adversities that I don't see as adversities, I just see them as opportunities to learn. And I think that is the way forwards, because we can learn every minute of every day, as I said before, if we choose to learn. So yes, I had some unpleasant experiences. I've, like all of us have had, but the learning that you can gain from those experiences are second to none. So if going in with that approach that there's no such word as failure. Failure is purely feedback that actually this didn't quite work at this time. So what can I learn from this to do it better next time? And so I'm so grateful for every what you could describe as adverse situation or adverse discussion or adverse individual that I worked with, because they've made me who I am today with my passion to make a difference for others.
Yeah, and that's why you're speaking out. That's why you're using your voice. And that's why we're here today sharing this message, because of what you have to say and how what you have experienced has led you to see this toxic leadership and the impact that it can make. What's the next steps for you, Lizzy? What is it you really want to achieve in terms of your legacy? You've already created some so far.
Yeah, I just do whatever I can. So yes, I'm in the process of writing my book, because that gets to a different audience, doing more and more podcasts, doing, more speaking. I think this is where one great thing of COVID, no matter how traumatic it's been, has been extraordinary in the fact we are now can be all on the global stage. So our message can get out further and wider. And so, I want to be that ripple in the pond, so that the more I can support others, the more they can support their teams and their teams and their teams. And, just keep the move. I'm generating a movement. Movement, so that it just becomes part of who we are.
And with the writing the book, tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, so my book is a mixture of stories, but using stories as an example. So yeah, it's going to be it's either going to be called Stand Tall, No Longer Small, or it's going to be called Overcome Your Inner War Zone, because we all have that inner war zone in our heads. And it's just thoughts mean nothing. Thoughts is like a cloud going over our heads. So it's all about leadership, but a leadership of lessons I've learned along the way. So some stories to explain, stepping off the tarmac to go to Afghanistan. I had a choice to do that, but I never saw it as a choice. But we all have choice as leaders, even though we don't realize there's a choice. We have had a choice over the last 18 months. We had a choice in March. Do we comply with what we're told to stay at home and stay safe, or do we ignore it? We have a choice whether to, for example, those of us that do speaking, had a choice? Do we just pack up our businesses because there's no face-to-face events, or do we take it online? And communication, all sorts of aspects, lots of C's: communication, courage, choice, cheerleading. Are you celebrating? Are you celebrating your achievements? Are you creating opportunities? Are you living with compassion? How are you collaborating?
That is a lot of C's now.
Exactly.
You got choice, you got communication, cheerleading, courage, celebrations, compassion, collaboration. Yeah, there's a whole book there.
Yeah, exactly.
So overcoming your inner war zone. Yes, we all have these dark thoughts. We all have the inner voices. And what's your inner voice telling you now, Lizzy?
My inner voice is telling me right now how wonderful it is to be speaking to you right now, actually. But I think the biggest tip I would share is that our inner voice is just background noise. It's not us. It's not us speaking. It's there in theory to protect us from, again, the tiger coming and getting us. Like, don't do that. That's where procrastination comes in. Don't do your tax return. It's not a pleasant experience. Just don't do it. And then you think, actually, if I do my tax return, whoa, I've done it, win. I'm not going to get a letter from the tax people. So it's acknowledging that it's just noise. Just don't listen to it. And I always, when I have talking to clients about this, I thought, because a thought creates our feelings create our actions, and our actions create a result. So notice when that negativity kicks in, and I talk about switch it, flip it. Asking yourself a question. Talk about the word why. Why is a really powerful in terms of purpose, but it's not always powerful in terms of why am I so rubbish at this. Because our brain will then look at all the evidence. Well, you're rubbish because you oversleep, you do this, you do that, whatever. That's completely disempowering, opposed to switch it to say, well, what can I learn from this? And then our brain will give us all the things we can learn from it, which is way more empowering.
So switching the why for the what sometimes.
Yes, exactly. For a W opposed to a C. Yeah.
So we've talked about what's next. It's the book. It's talking more on podcasts. It's speaking opportunities. And by the time this comes out, I think you will have been in the final for the Professional Speaking Association. So congratulations for making it as a finalist.
Yeah.
Well done. I was there a year ago. I can't believe it's come around so quickly. But an incredible experience, and enjoy that to share your message with everybody. So, Lizzy, how would people get in contact with you?
Yes, so I've got my website, which is rypotential.co.uk. I'm really active on LinkedIn, so that's just Dr. Lizzy Bernthal on LinkedIn. And I'm in Facebook, Lizzy.Bernthal. But I think LinkedIn is generally my main, easiest way to get hold of me.
Perfect. I'll make sure they all go into the show notes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing why you do what you do, and sharing your background, which is incredible, and your mission, your huge mission to sort of eliminate, if you can, toxic leadership, which is a great thing to be doing. Have you got some final words for us, Lizzy?
Yeah, the final word I would say is we have everything within us already. There's nothing broken, nothing is fixed. When a baby's born, they kick their legs, they've got poo in their nappy, they've got spiky hair. They never say, don't look at me, I'm having a bad hair day. We're all of us born whole and complete, and then stuff happens, often with our childhood, where we set up those beliefs that we're not good enough, we can't do this, we're not deserving, all that stuff. So it's really acknowledging that we are amazing, we're whole, we're complete, and that's who we are. And nothing needs to be changed. And it's just unpicking a bit of that, weeding the garden that sometimes get those weeds in the way, so that we can really flourish as our true, authentic self that's already there. Nothing needs to be changed.
Thank you for listening to Focus on Why with me, Amy Rowlandson. To show your appreciation and to help other listeners understand what value you have received from tuning in today, please leave me an Apple Podcast 5-star review. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.